Here's a guy who tries to defend Pascal's wager.
The most rational thing to do is to believe in God. Because if you do, and God exists, you will spend an eternity in heaven. And if you do, but God does not exist, then there is simply no afterlife. So, at best, you win heaven, and at worst, you lose nothing.
Well, you don't lose nothing. You lose the life you could have lived doing something other than practicing a religion that you're only practicing to avoid hell.
But if God does exist, and you don't believe in him, then you'll burn in hell forever. And if God does not exist, and you also don't believe in him, well, then there is no afterlife either. This, in essence, is Pascal's wager, a famous argument that says belief in God is the most rational course of action for anyone to take.
Fellow YouTuber Shannon Q once pointed out that if you follow that logic, the most rational thing to do is to follow whichever religion has the most sadistic conception of hell. For the Christians who use Pascal's wager as an argument, you should know that Christianity does not fit that bill. Bart Ehrman wrote a whole book about how hell as a place where people burn in a lake of fire forever is not really portrayed in the Bible. It is, however, quite explicitly portrayed in the Quran.
The two most common objections you'll find online today are the following. 1. If you only believe in God to win eternal heaven, then that's not a sincere belief, and God will obviously not fall for your trick.
Even if you manage to cultivate a sincere belief, God will know that the reason you cultivated that sincere belief was for entirely cynical, self-interested purposes. It's questionable as to whether that would really count.
2. Christianity is not the only religion. Pascal's wager works just as well with any other religion.
As I already said, it actually works better with the religions that have a more sadistic depiction of hell. If you follow the logic of Pascal's wager, you should find the religion with the depiction of hell that you would most like to avoid and convert to that one.
First, we need to look at the purpose of the wager. It's not meant to be a proof of God's existence.
Are people saying that it is? I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that it was proof of God's existence, so whom are you rebutting here?
In fact, it's not meant to be a proof of anything.
Is it not meant to be an argument for the premise that the most rational thing to do is believe in God?
In fact, elsewhere in the book, Pascal explicitly states that reason is not enough to acquire true faith.
A common objection to Pascal's wager is that it assumes doxastic voluntarism. It assumes that you can simply will yourself to believe in something, even if you don't naturally find it convincing. Pascal does say that if you just go through the motions of being religious, you can effectively brainwash yourself into believing. But if the reason you do that is because you are motivated by self-interest, why would that count toward your salvation?
Therefore, that the wager, being a reasonable thought experiment, can never lead to faith. The Christian religion, which alone has reason, does not acknowledge as her true children those who believe without inspiration. Inspirations alone can produce a true and saving effect.
How do you get inspiration? Is it achieved mystically? Does God grant it to you? If you don't get that inspiration, the recommendation that you ought to believe in God is really quite useless.
Well then, what is the purpose of the thought experiment? It's supposed to be a wake-up call. What is at stake here is nothing less than the fate of your immortal soul. A big theme in the Pensée is Pascal's astonishment as to how little people seem to care about their souls.
What's even more disturbing to me is the fate of other people's souls. Even if your soul is saved, how could you just go about your life with the knowledge that countless millions of other souls are experiencing eternal torment?
The immortality of the soul is a matter which is of so great importance to us, and which touches us so profoundly, that we must have lost all feeling to be indifferent as to knowing what it is. We're not used to speak about the soul in this way in the modern age. That doesn't matter. Pascal simply means to say that the afterlife, the great infinity that lies beyond our mortal life, should be of the greatest concern to us.
The reason it's not of great concern to me is because I find the idea of an afterlife to be nonsensical. I don't understand what it would mean for my mind to continue after my brain has stopped existing, given that my mind is something that my brain does. But again, even if I did understand such a thing, it would not only be of concern to me what happens to my own soul, but also the souls of everyone who didn't make it into heaven.
Saving ourselves from eternal hellfire should be the number one priority of every living human.
What's the point of making something a priority if you don't have control over it? Even if cynically brainwashing myself into believing Christianity counted towards salvation, my issue with that religion is that it is incomprehensible to me. I wouldn't know how to get myself to believe in it, even if I wanted to. I don't know how to cultivate a belief in a proposition that seems utterly incoherent.
Because no amount of pleasure in our finite, short life could ever measure up to eternal damnation. Yet, how surprising, says Pascal, how little people seem to care for it. You'd expect everyone to become a philosopher, but the exact opposite is true.
I do sometimes wonder how Christians who believe there is a hell where people are tortured forever just go about their lives as if that isn't happening. It's hard to imagine going about my daily routine with the knowledge that countless billions of other people's souls, possibly even more souls than are currently alive, are in constant eternal agony.
Speaking of the average person, Pascal writes, "They are afraid of mere trifles, they foresee them, they feel them. And this same man, who spends so many days and nights in rage and despair for the loss of office or for some imaginary insult to his honor, is the very one who knows, without anxiety and without emotion, that he will lose all by death. It is a monstrous thing to see." The wager is meant to shake you out of your stupor. Pascal is trying to say, wake up, your soul is at stake here. Why do you think so rarely about the afterlife?
If I believed in hell, I would think about it all the time. If heaven and hell exist, then even if I ended up in heaven, I would think about hell constantly. I wouldn't even know how to enjoy heaven with the knowledge that hell exists and that countless people are suffering there.
Again, the purpose of the wager is not to prove anything. Its purpose, as Pascal wrote it down, is to shock you into action, to start you on your search for religious truth. The greatest sin for Pascal is not being wrong about God's existence, but not caring about God at all.
Well, then he's not primarily concerned with truth, is he?
Not even thinking about it, passing day by day in this short mortal life, while the infinitely greater afterlife is only a few years away.
And even then, even if you end up in heaven, how could you not be constantly thinking about all the people who didn't make it in?
The purpose of the wager is at least to make you think, and to consider that an eternity in hellfire just might await you.
And an eternity of being horribly disturbed by the mere existence of hellfire would await me, even if I got into heaven.
The purpose of the wager is not to turn you into a believer. It's meant to put you on the path towards becoming one.
What's the point of putting someone on that path to becoming a believer if it's not to get them to actually become one?
Objection 1. If you only believe in God for the sole purpose of getting into heaven, that's not authentic belief, and God won't be tricked by your insincerity. On its face, this is obviously true, and Pascal obviously knew this too, which is why that's not actually the argument he's making in the first place. For Pascal, you need 3 things to come to sincere faith: reason, custom, and inspiration. The wager is an appeal to reason. Any reasonable person can understand the decision matrix that the wager offers.
If inspiration, which is outside of your control, is necessary for sincere belief, then the wager is useless to people who don't already have that inspiration.
They might not agree with the contents, but at least they understand the argument. But reason is not enough. It's just one of 3 ingredients. The other 2 being first custom, or actually acting like a Christian, going to church, taking the Eucharist, etc., even if you haven't arrived at real belief yet. And second, inspiration, which Pascal believes will come to you on its own if you sincerely make an effort to open up yourself to faith.
But if what motivates you to become faithful in the first place is your own self-interest, then the reason you try to open yourself to faith will begin in insincerity.
Pascal knows full well that just the wager by itself is not enough to move someone to embrace faith. It is the heart which experiences God, and not the reason. This, then, is faith. God felt by the heart, not by the reason. Reason is not enough to come to belief, and therefore simply accepting Pascal's wager on account of the heavenly award that awaits you, a decision informed by reason, cannot be sufficient to attain true faith.
I'm not convinced that reason is even necessary to have faith that a God exists. There are clearly people who have a sincere faith that God exists who haven't thought about it that much. Since reason seems to me to be neither necessary nor sufficient, it's not clear why Pascal makes such a big deal out of it.
That brings us to objection number 2. We mentioned Voltaire already. His French Enlightenment colleague, Denis Diderot, also made a quip to object to Pascal's wager. A Muslim might make the exact same argument and still be right.
Given that it would make more sense to prefer to avoid Muslim hell than Christian hell, a Muslim could make an even better case than a Christian.
Very true. So it would seem that Pascal's wager is not such a cut and dry decision after all, because there are possibly an infinite number of religions, and they all tend to claim that only they are the one true religion. So the odds of the wager suddenly don't look so good. How do you know that a Christian God is the correct one to believe in? Again, you can only make this counter-argument if you purposefully divorce the wager from the context in which it was written. Pascal was a scientist and a math prodigy. He was a smart guy. Obviously, he knew about other religions. It turns out, he addresses them directly in the rest of the book. He has his reasons to believe in the Christian faith as the only true faith. Those reasons and arguments are too numerous to list. In the Gutenberg edition of the Pensée, freely accessible to anyone with an internet connection, there is an entire chapter entitled Proofs of Jesus Christ.
But see, a crux of the wager is human fallibility. Sure, you could be right that God does not exist, but do you want to take that chance given the stakes of being wrong? The same logic applies to choosing Christianity over Islam. Sure, what you believe to be proofs of Christianity could be correct, but given that the stakes of believing in Christianity over Islam is an eternity in a hell that is much more miserable than the one depicted in the Bible, do you really want to take that risk? By the logic of Pascal's wager, it still makes more sense to choose Islam over Christianity, no matter how airtight the evidence for Christianity seems to be. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.